Sometimes I wish, and I'm saying this seriously, that we too had a nuclear weapon, because that is what Europe and America understands. And remember, it is no longer just Europe. There is a new scramble for Africa. The Chinese are here, the Turks are here, the Qataris are here. All of them are coming back. And the military bases that you see here is telling you that if you don't behave, we are going to use force. Interference in Africa started with slavery. When slavery had lost its value, it graduated into colonization. And that is the context in which Berlin must be seen. When the European powers sat in Berlin and divided the continent of Africa into spheres of influence. When colonization had lost its luster through a combination of certain realities and agitation from the continent, we regained our independence. But as John Henry Clark, that great African-American, said, we regained independence by mimicking European governance systems. And he rightly says, no African country will ever succeed on the basis of those systems. After that, the neo-colonial project was instituted. And all of us will remember Kwame Nkrumah's book, Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. And he there says the most dangerous. We are now in a neo-colonial stage when the European powers are at their most diabolical, when the Americans are at their most diabolical. And it's not lost on me that they'll be meeting in Hiroshima next week as the G7. And how do they interfere? They interfere militarily. They ensure that you in the military are trained in Sandhurst, are trained in West Point, so they affect your mind. They interfere diplomatically, sometimes through gunboat diplomacy. And that is why you see sometimes your typical European ambassador treats our heads of states in a condescending manner. They interfere through institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. They interfere by ensuring that our economic infrastructure is beholden to theirs through dollarization. They interfere through education. They interfere by influencing our processes, by lending us advisors who tell us what to do. The neo-colonial project is alive and well, and it is at its most dangerous, and we Africans must smell the coffee. If we don't, they are going to continue to interfere. How else do they interfere? Through NGOs, Danida, SIDA, UKAID, USAID. These are Trojan horses that are introduced into our countries for the purpose of influencing our processes. And they infiltrate our institutions. Right now, if you look at the African Development Bank, look at the shareholding. It's Americans, it's Germans, it's Japanese, it's the French. And the Europeans have done their bit. They also interfere through post-colonial institutions. The Commonwealth of independent nations, they are not sovereign states, former French-speaking nations. These are the instruments that they interfere through. And how do we then deal with this situation? We Africans must now begin to recognize, and this was recognized as early as 1963, and the chair of the commission is here. They'll be celebrating 60 years in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And 60 years ago, on the 24th day of May, Kwame Nkrumah warned us. He said, if we are not united, they are going to interfere with us militarily. They are going to interfere with our economy. They are going to interfere with our agriculture. They are going to interfere with our health. Our duty, and I hope that when African heads of states and government meet in Addis next week, it will not be another jamboree at which pro forma speeches are read. I hope it will be an occasion to give meaning to Africa Agenda 2063. I hope it will be an occasion to give meaning to Africa Continental Free Trade Area. I hope it will be an occasion to revitalize the Malabo Declaration, the Maputo Declaration, the Yamoussoukro Declaration. In other words, we Africans, as I conclude, we Africans must stop operating in silos. Rwanda alone will not confront them. Burundi alone will not confront them. But if we go through the regional bodies and ultimately the African Union, we may indeed succeed in putting away this bulwark. We had the East African Community, which, as you know, died in 1970, as was revived again in 1999. The original members, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, have subsequently, after the 1999 treaty, Rwanda are now members, Burundi are members, South Sudan is a member, and recently we admitted the Democratic Republic of Congo. The whole idea was to create a federation, and in the year 2004, the then heads of state did appoint a committee for fast tracking, and a report was given talking about how we are going to have a common currency, a common tariff, and common services. And indeed, some of the things are already happening. It is only in the area of common currency, which we thought we'd have in 2024, I don't think we will. And then, of course, the idea of having a political federation, as I've already said, there is a committee going round. And the idea of the federation is that we make sure that there is free movement of persons, and certain countries are ahead. Rwanda, for example, I think is ahead of the region in terms of offering opportunities for employment and permits. There are certain countries like Burundi which are still lagging behind. But the whole idea is that ultimately we'll have a confederation. And that confederation will be a confederation where we will have a president. In fact, under the fast tracking document, all ministers in charge of East African integration ought to have moved and ought to have been operating from Arusha in Dar es Salaam by the year 2010. So that is moving apace. In SADC region, where we thought South Africa would be the anchor, I don't think that has beyond the trade issue. The political question is one that has not come out as strongly as it should. And that is for a number of reasons. First of all, South Africa reeling from apartheid, and then Mozambique and Angola there with the Portuguese tradition. But you can see that trade is one of the major drivers. In ECOWAS, we also know that Nigeria is the anchor in that regard. They were moving towards a monetary policy. And in fact, there is an ECOWAS passport in the same way that there is an East African passport. So in a nutshell, Central Africa is problematic. The Maghreb is problematic. And that is something that we must talk, because in the early days, and you just give me a little latitude on this, Joe. In the early days, in the 1960, we had clear Pan-Africanists in the Maghreb. King Hassan of Morocco hosted certain meetings in Casablanca, Morocco, Mokhtar al-Dadai in Mauritania, Habib Bourguiba in Tunisia, Hamid Ben Bella in Algeria, and Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. But in the recent past, we now have individuals who are undecided as to whether they want to be part of the African continent or they want to be part of the Arab. So the Maghreb is a little problematic, and Morocco, you know, at one time even left the African Union. So in a nutshell, the drive, the hunger is there, and the push is there. So personally, I'm not very worried. I think that what we ought to do is to plant this seed so that the fire keeps burning, because it is through this regional integration that we ultimately will have an African Union. And easier said than done. Perhaps we are too optimistic, but is optimism not the mother's milk of progress?